Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Karnov, brought to us by Data East. In Karnov, we play as a fire-breathing Russian, who's on his way in order to get some treasure from the lost city of Babylon. You may remember Karnov as the first boss in the game Bad Dudes, also for the NES, and just like that game, Karnov was also based on an arcade game. While this game has garnered a cult following over the years for the NES, it still does suffer from some mediocre control and definitely some programming errors. So here we go with Karnov for the NES. As you can see, there's really nothing at the startup screen, no extra options, and if you leave it there, you'll see no story or even a demo reel. In Karnov, you can see we play as the fire-breathing Russian who can spit fireballs. After upgrading it, you can actually get up to 3 spread shots, which is very powerful, and we'll have that for most of the game. There's also a good amount of variety of different items to collect for you to use, including Ks, which are basically these bonus point items. You also have bombs, ladders, wings, and even shoes that allow you to jump higher. For the most part in the game, it's one of those games where you just keep walking forward and firing non-stop. If you see a projectile coming directly at you, you may have to do a jump or a duck underneath of it, but for the most part, in the first few levels at least, you can just keep walking over to the right and firing, and you should have no problem beating most of the enemies. When you get to the end of the first level, it's time to battle the first boss, this giant fish enemy. He walks forward a few steps and then jumps over you. If you time it right, you'll get him to jump over you, and you can just let him keep doing that over and over again while you're delivering all your hits. It'll only take 1 or maybe 2 jumps at most for you to take all his health away and defeat him and go on to the next stage. At the beginning of stage 2, be very careful of these giant totem-like enemies. They fire straight at you, and you'll have to destroy them with multiple hits, but it doesn't seem like you're actually hitting them, but after a few fireballs you can see they start to break away. I highly recommend taking them out individually before trying to get all 3 of them on screen at once. Be careful climbing up this ladder because you can see another one of the totems at the top. As soon as it goes on screen, it'll probably start firing at you, so try to dodge the fire while you work your way to the top in order to actually hit it. Anytime you see the 2 blue bird enemies coming at you, pretty much just keep walking to the right, as they'll stop flying for a second and then try to swoop down at you, but if you're continuing over to the right, they'll just go past you and behind you each and every time. As far as strategy goes, the second level is pretty much just like the first. We're going to continue walking over to the right, firing consistently in order to take out all the enemies. Heck, you don't even really need to collect the items if you don't want to, but I recommend having at least a couple of the bombs and definitely a ladder, because you will be using that. At the end of the second level, you fight this guy who has a lion by a leash. Just keep firing a lot, and he'll only probably get 1, maybe even 2 projectiles out at you before he's destroyed and you move on to the next stage. Near the beginning of stage number 3, use your ladder ability to make a ladder, and then do a large jump so you can make it over the gap. There is no way, I don't think, in order to actually get over that gap without either using wings or a ladder. There are a few pits in this stage, so be careful of them as you're making your way over with your jumps. The jumping isn't perfect, but you move rather slowly and you can actually make a pretty far jump. However, the edges of certain platforms aren't accessible when you make certain jumps, so you may end up finding yourself fall through if you're at the very edge instead of being able to actually land on them. Over here you can drop down this hole in order to collect a bunch of extra K items. After you're making your way out of the hole off the ladder, be sure to keep firing to the right as you're going to have one of those enemies that are going to try to throw rocks at you. Over here we grab the boomerang item for the first time. It literally gives you 1 boomerang you can fire out before you end up losing. The Tyrannosaurus boss is the hardest so far, and we fight him a couple of times. His fireballs that come out are in an erratic pattern that can sometimes get you stuck and you won't be able to dodge all of them. Thankfully, it takes 2 hits to actually defeat Karnov, so just keep jumping and firing, and hopefully you can defeat him before you end up taking 2 hits. The 4th level is an ice level, but there is no difference as far as the terrain goes because you won't be finding yourself sliding around. Ignore the ladder and just continue over to the right, because it'll just lead to a few extra items if you really need them. You'll also notice in the game that the screen only can scroll in one direction at a time, and because of this you won't be able to backtrack easily. You'll have to wait for the screen to stop before you'll actually have access to move backwards. When you make it to the edge here, just be sure to jump over, because there actually is a platform below, thankfully, and you can land on the ladder in order to actually make it over to the far right platform for the boss. This Medusa-like enemy is pretty easy, especially compared to the Tyrannosaurus. She fires a lot, but she always fires in a certain pattern, so you'll have easy access in order to either duck or jump over her projectiles. Level number 6 is probably the weirdest in the game, as it's a water level and you actually get to see Karnov swim. And even though Karnov is a fire breather, he has no problem firing underneath water, and he's actually pretty agile and can swim around pretty easily. There you were able to see me use the boomerang item. Like I said, you only get one of them if you've only collected one, and it just hits the enemies and then goes off screen. It's much easier and much more effective just to continue your normal fire. Up here you can climb up and you'll end up having to fight the fish boss from the first level. Usually at this point though, one of the dragon type enemies tries to come up as well, so I continue moving over to the left to get him off of screen. I then have to face the other fish enemy once again, but that's okay considering the dragon usually will then spawn from the top, allowing me to have easy access to take out the fish enemy and continue over to the right this time. Enemies spawning in the game can be quite weird, and sometimes enemies will spawn where they're supposed to, and other times you'll have no enemy that'll spawn there. So you always have to be on your toes because you're never quite sure where an enemy may be coming from. Watch out for the blue bird enemies, once again continuing over to the right, and then fight the Tyrannosaurus boss again. It's the same as before, so you have to be very careful trying to do your best to dodge the fire, so you can get enough hits to kill him, and then move on to the next stage. Level number 7 takes place in these ruins. These giant blue armor knights will start spawning and coming towards you. Usually they have one on the right and left that'll both spawn trying to walk towards you, but thankfully it only takes 1 or 2 hits to kill them, and sometimes they'll just explode on their own. Watch out then for a couple of enemies with swords that'll start walking towards you pretty rapidly. A bunch of them spawn, but they pretty much only take 1 hit to take out. This part can be rather tricky. Climb up the ladders as fast as possible, and when the fish enemy spawns, make sure you get up to the next level fast enough so you can actually jump up in the air and avoid getting hit by them. Then, equip your wings for the first time in the game and start flying over the level. A few enemies may get in your way, but just continue moving over to the right for as long as you can before your wings give out and you fall back down. When you do so, just keep firing in case there is any enemies nearby as you fall down. But most of the time, if you continued over to the right, you should land in a safe spot. After a handful of more enemies, usually from behind, throw some projectiles at you, you then have to fight the Medusa boss again. Just keep firing directly at her and make a jump every so often so you can cause the diagonal of the fire to go in a different direction, allowing you to easily dodge and defeat her. You then move on to level number 7. Level number 7 takes place in the desert. Keep firing straight at the normal enemies, and then you'll have to take on a series of 3 of the totems, once again pretty much in the same pattern that they were in level number 2. When you make it to the giant pyramid, just keep jumping up brick by brick, consistently firing so that any enemies that do spawn, you easily hit. When you make it to the top, there's a large pit for you to fall down. Don't worry if you fall down because that's where you're supposed to go. There's no way to actually jump over and past that column on the right. When you fall down here, continue up the platforms and then drop down here. Make sure that you have your ladder ready and make one appear right near this enemy when he spawns. Climb up the ladder, and you can actually get a health item in case you got hit, and walking over to the yellow thing will actually cause a whole bunch of Ks to appear. Then, if you walk slightly to the left, a platform appears with an enemy. Defeat the enemy and then drop down off the platform, and you'll now be able to head down to a secret passageway which will allow you to complete the stage. It definitely took me a few tries to realize that you had to defeat that enemy on top in order for that one block to suddenly disappear when you fall back down. When you drop down, I usually like to equip my shield to protect myself from the fire of those weird mummy-like enemies, so that I can eventually jump over them and continue in the stage to the boss. For the boss battle, you have to fight this weird double-headed dragon type thing. Its pattern is a little bit like the Tyrannosaurus, but it's actually a little bit easier than him, but it takes more shots to take him out. Just keep jumping up in the air and continue firing while dodging his fire, and it'll only take a couple of seconds to defeat him and you move on to stage number 8. Stage number 8 is a necessity to have the wings, because if you try to jump off here, you'll end up falling into a large pit. Fly over to the right and take out this giant griffin-like statue from above before moving through it and continuing the stage. Be careful of a few of the enemies on the platforms, because the areas you'll be moving through are a little bit small. Up here, you'll get yourself another set of wings and use them when you get to the edge of the platform. Take out another one of the griffin statues like we did before, and then immediately go down the pit next to the griffin. Continue flying and grab yourself at least one more set of the wings. Continue flying through, and if you find yourself falling at any point not on an actual platform, be sure to immediately use the wings again to prevent yourself falling to your death. Just fly over all the enemies located in this area, then fly up just a little bit and continue over to the right to get to this platform in order to actually get to the boss, which once again is the two-headed dragon from before. He's the same exact boss, just keep firing and take him out after a few seconds, and we move on to stage number 9, the final level of the game. At the beginning of the stage, you have more of those blue armors we saw back in level number 7. Watch out for a few bat enemies, and eventually you'll come to a ladder. I recommend ignoring this first ladder and just continue over to the right. There are a few different paths you can take, but some of them end up leading to some dead ends. Eventually you'll make it to an end and have to climb up the ladder here. Be careful of the enemies above you, and I recommend using the big bomb here in order to take out both enemies at once. Continue making your way over to the right, ignoring the next ladder, and then fall down at the edge of the platform. You'll land on another platform just slightly below, and you'll make it over here. You can't make the jump, so you'll have to use one of your shoes that you have in order to make a longer jump, and make it over the gap, and then fall down the big pit next to it. Over here, climb up the ladder and be very careful of the guy throwing rocks at the top. Wait for him to throw one, and then quickly climb up and finish it. Fall down a couple more gaps at the edge of the platforms, and when you make it to the bottom, you'll have to actually face off with another one of those Medusa bosses that we fought earlier on in the game. You're on a very small platform here, so I recommend jumping and try to hit it in the air as it's falling down. Once that's done, climb up a few more ladders and you'll make it to the top where it's time to battle the final boss of the game. For some reason, against the final boss, you end up going down to one projectile only, so it can be a little bit harder to hit. Wait a couple seconds for you to see the eyes that start glowing in the background in one of the windows, and then immediately walk over to the right. This will allow you not to get hit as his head spawns out of the window. Basically, whatever window he spawns out of, he's going to come towards you, so continue moving in one direction or another, and then do a quick jump in the air after a couple of seconds of hitting him, so his projectile ends up going past you. It may take a time or two in order to get used to this, but overall this boss battle for being the final boss is definitely nothing as hard as we've seen in other games. Once you're able to defeat him, you get the ending. And that's the ending to Karnov. Nothing special, just a little bit of a song, and it says, "Congratulations, the end." The sad part is, I've actually seen worse endings than that. But either way, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.